Kai pulled his thin blanket tighter around his shoulders as the winter wind cut through the narrow alley behind Chen's restaurant. The 12-year-old boy had learned long ago that the metal grates near the kitchen vents provided the only warmth he could find on New Terra Colony's coldest nights. His stomach growled, reminding him that he had not eaten since yesterday morning when a kind woman had given him half a sandwich. The colonial city stretched above him in towers of steel and glass, but down here in the forgotten spaces between buildings, Kai made his home. He had been living on the streets for 8 months now, ever since the transport accident that took his parents. The colony officials said they would find him a place in a youth home, but the waiting list was long, and Kai had stopped believing their promises. Tonight was different from other nights. The temperature had dropped so low that even the usual sounds of the city seemed frozen in place. Kai's breath came out in white clouds and his fingers had gone numb hours ago. He knew he needed to find better shelter soon, or the cold would become dangerous. But first he wanted to check the trash bins behind the restaurant. Sometimes the kitchen staff threw out food that was still good enough to eat. He moved carefully through the darkness, his worn shoes making soft sounds on the frozen ground. The alley was quiet except for the hum of machinery and the distant noise of traffic on the upper levels. Kai had just reached the large waste container when he saw something that made him stop and stare. There, nestled between bags of garbage, sat an object that seemed to glow with its own light. It was roughly the size of a basketball, but its surface was covered in crystalline patterns that caught and reflected the dim light from the street lamps above. The object pulsed gently as if it were breathing, and gave off a faint warmth that Kai could feel even from several feet away. Kai approached slowly, his natural caution warring with his curiosity. In his months on the streets, he had learned that strange things were often dangerous things. But this object did not look threatening. It looked beautiful and somehow lonely, abandoned in the trash like he had been abandoned by the world. He reached out and touched the surface. It was warm, wonderfully warm and smooth like polished stone. The crystalline patterns seemed to shift under his fingers, swirling in colors he could not quite name. Kai carefully lifted the object from the trash and held it close. The warmth spread through his chest, easing the deep cold that had settled into his bones. Then the object moved. Kai almost dropped it in surprise, but something told him to hold on. A thin crack appeared along one side and then another. The crack spread across the surface like a spider web, and a soft sound came from inside. It was not quite a cry and not quite a chirp, but something in between. It was the sound of something small and afraid. Kai sat down on the cold ground, cradling the cracking object in his lap. He watched in amazement as pieces of the crystalline shell began to fall away, revealing what lay inside. First, he saw a tiny claw no bigger than his thumb, covered in scales that shimmered between deep red and bright gold. Then a small head emerged, with large eyes that blinked in confusion at the cold world around it. It was a dragon. A real dragon, though no bigger than a kitten. Kai had seen pictures of dragons in the library terminals, back when he still went to school. He knew they were real creatures from distant worlds, intelligent and powerful. But he had never imagined he would see one, especially not like this, so small and helpless. The baby dragon shivered violently as the last pieces of shell fell away. It opened its mouth and made a thin, desperate sound that cut straight through Kai's heart. The creature was freezing. Whatever warmth the egg had provided was gone now, and the winter air was too much for its tiny body to handle. The dragon's scales seemed to lose their shine as Kai watched, and its movements became weaker. Kai did not think about what he was doing. He simply acted on instinct, the same instinct that made him share his food with stray cats and help injured birds he found in the alleys. He unwrapped the blanket from his own shoulders, feeling the immediate bite of the cold air against his skin. The blanket was old and had many holes, but it was the only thing he owned that provided any protection from the freezing nights. He wrapped the baby dragon carefully in the blanket, making sure every part of its small body was covered. The dragon stopped shivering almost immediately and made a different sound, softer and more content. It looked up at Kai with eyes that seemed far too intelligent for such a small creature, and then it pressed itself against his chest, seeking the warmth of his body. Kai held the dragon close and stood up, ignoring the cold that now attacked him from all sides. His coat was too thin to provide much protection without the blanket, but he could not bear to take the blanket back. The dragon needed it more than he did. He had survived cold nights before. He would survive this one too. He named her Ember because of the way her scales glowed like dying coals when the light hit them just right. She made small comfortable sounds as he carried her through the alley, searching for a better place to spend the night. Kai knew he needed to find shelter quickly, both for himself and for his new companion. He remembered a maintenance tunnel he had discovered last week, a place where warm air from the underground systems created a pocket of heat. It was not much, but it would be better than staying in the open air. Kai moved through the familiar paths of his street life, holding Ember carefully against his chest. She had stopped making sounds now and seemed to be sleeping, her small body rising and falling with each breath. The tunnel entrance was hidden behind a broken fence panel. Kai slipped through and made his way down the metal stairs into the darkness below. The air grew warmer with each step, and by the time he reached the bottom he could no longer see his breath. It was not warm like a real home would be, but it was warm enough to survive. Kai found a dry corner and sat down, leaning against the curved wall of the tunnel. He adjusted the blanket around Ember, making sure she was completely covered. The dragon stirred in her sleep and made a small happy sound. Kai smiled despite his own discomfort. His body shook from the cold and he knew he would not sleep much tonight, but somehow that did not matter. He had saved a life tonight. In a world that had taken everything from him, he had found something helpless and afraid, and he had chosen to help it. The thought warmed him from the inside in a way that no blanket ever could. Kai looked down at the sleeping dragon in his arms and made a silent promise. Whatever happened, he would keep her safe. They would survive together. Outside, the winter wind howled through the streets of New Terra Colony, but down in the maintenance tunnel, a homeless boy and a baby dragon shared what little warmth they had, and for one night, neither of them was alone. The first snow of spring melted slowly across New Terra Colony, marking 3 months since Kai had found Ember in that trash bin behind the restaurant. The baby dragon had grown during that time, though she was still small enough to fit comfortably in Kai's arms. Her scales had developed a deeper shine, shifting from red to gold depending on how the light caught them, and her wings, though still too small for flight, could fold neatly against her back. Kai had moved them to an abandoned warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. The building had been empty for years, ever since the manufacturing company that owned it went out of business. Most of the windows were broken and the roof leaked in several places, but one corner of the second floor stayed relatively dry and warm. Kai had gathered old blankets and cardboard to make a nest where they both slept. Every morning, Kai would wake before dawn and leave Ember sleeping in their shelter. He had found work doing odd jobs for shop owners in the market district, sweeping floors and carrying boxes for a few credits. It was not much money, but it was enough to buy food. He always bought extra, knowing that Ember needed to eat too. The dragon had developed a taste for dried meat and seemed to especially enjoy the sweet fruits that grew in the colony's greenhouses. Ember was smart, far smarter than Kai had expected. Within the first month, she had learned to understand simple words. By the second month, she could follow complex sentences and respond with gestures and sounds that Kai had learned to interpret. She could not speak human words yet, her throat was not shaped right for it, but she communicated clearly through her actions and the musical sounds she made. One evening, as they shared a meal of bread and dried fish, Kai noticed a small cut on his hand from work. Before he could react, Ember had pressed her small snout against the wound. A gentle warmth spread from the touch, and when she pulled away, the cut had closed. Kai stared in amazement. He had read that dragons possessed healing abilities, but seeing it happen was something else entirely. "Thank you, Ember," he said softly, stroking her head. She made a pleased humming sound and curled up in his lap. Kai spent his evenings teaching Ember about the world. He told her stories about kindness and courage, about people who helped others even when it cost them something. He explained why it was important to protect those who could not protect themselves, to stand up for the weak and the forgotten. Ember listened to every word with her large, intelligent eyes fixed on his face. Sometimes Kai wondered if he was doing the right thing, keeping Ember with him instead of taking her to the authorities. He knew that dragons were important creatures, and that somewhere there must be people looking for her. But every time he thought about giving her up, Ember would nuzzle against him with such trust and affection that he could not bear the idea of separation. The dragon had become more than a companion. She had become family, the only family Kai had left in the world. When the nights were cold, they kept each other warm. When Kai felt hopeless about his situation, Ember's presence reminded him that he had someone depending on him, someone who needed him. It gave his life purpose and meaning in a way nothing else had since his parents died. Ember learned by watching Kai. When he shared his food with the stray cats that lived near the warehouse, Ember began leaving bits of her own food out for them too. When Kai helped an elderly woman carry her shopping bags, Ember walked beside them, her small presence somehow making the woman smile despite her fear of the strange creature. The dragon was learning kindness not from words alone, but from seeing Kai practice it every day. But their peaceful life could not last forever. One afternoon in late spring, Kai returned to the warehouse earlier than usual. The shop owner had sent him home because business was slow. He climbed the stairs to their corner, calling out to Ember as he always did. But instead of her happy chirping greeting, he heard voices. Human voices. Kai froze on the stairs. Through the gaps in the floor above, he could see shadows moving. 3 men stood in their corner, and one of them held Ember. She was struggling, making frightened sounds that made Kai's blood run cold. He recognized the men. They were part of a local gang that controlled several blocks of the industrial district. Everyone knew to stay away from them. "This thing's worth a fortune," one man said, his rough voice carrying clearly in the empty building. "Dragon hatchlings sell for thousands on the black market. Some rich collector will pay anything for it." "Stop squirming, you little pest," another man growled, shaking Ember roughly. Kai did not think. He ran up the remaining stairs and burst into the room. "Put her down," he shouted, his voice cracking with fear and anger. The 3 men turned to look at him. The largest one, the one holding Ember, laughed. "Well, look who it is. The street rat. This your pet boy?" "She's not a pet," Kai said, his hands clenched into fists. "She's my friend. Let her go." The man's smile disappeared. "Get lost, kid, before you get hurt." Ember struggled harder in the man's grip, her small claws scraping against his arms. The man cursed and tightened his hold. Kai saw the dragon's eyes fixed on him, filled with fear and confusion. She did not understand why these humans were hurting her, why Kai was not making them stop. Kai did the only thing he could think of. He ran at the man holding Ember and tried to pull her free. The other 2 men grabbed him immediately, their strong hands digging into his arms. Kai fought desperately, kicking and twisting, but he was just a 12-year-old boy against 3 grown men. "Stupid kid," one of the men muttered, and then Kai felt a sharp pain as a fist connected with his stomach. He fell to the floor, gasping for air. Ember screamed, a sound unlike any Kai had heard her make before. It was high and piercing, full of rage and terror. The temperature in the room suddenly spiked, and small flames flickered around her body. The man holding her yelped and dropped her, shaking his burned hands. The dragon ran to Kai, pressing herself against his side. Kai wrapped his arms around her protectively, even though he could barely breathe. The 3 men backed away, staring at the flames that now surrounded the small dragon. That was when the security officers burst through the door, their weapons drawn. Someone in a nearby building must have heard the commotion and called them. The warehouse erupted into chaos. The gang members tried to run but were quickly caught. Officers surrounded Kai and Ember, their faces showing shock at the sight of the dragon. A woman in an official uniform knelt beside Kai. Her badge identified her as a colony security captain. "Are you all right, son?" she asked gently. Kai nodded, still holding Ember tight. The dragon's flames had died down, but she was trembling against him. "Is this dragon yours?" the captain asked. "Yes," Kai said. No, I found her. She was going to freeze, so I helped her. Please don't take her away." The captain's expression was kind but firm. "I'm sorry, but I have to. Dragons are protected under galactic law. She needs to be returned to her people. There's a draconic embassy in the capital city. They'll take care of her." "No," Kai whispered. "Please no." More officers arrived, and among them was a representative from the embassy, a tall dragon in humanoid form wearing formal robes. He approached carefully and spoke in a gentle voice. "Young human, you have done a great service by protecting this hatchling. But she must return to her kind now. It is the law." Ember wrapped her small body around Kai's arm, her eyes pleading. Kai felt tears running down his face. "She'll be scared without me," he said. "I promise to keep her safe." "And you have," the dragon representative said. "You have kept her alive and well. But now she needs proper care and education among her own people. You understand, yes?" They pulled Ember away despite her struggles and Kai's protests. The last thing Kai saw before they took her out of the warehouse was her desperate eyes looking back at him, and the sound of her crying echoed in his ears long after she was gone. The captain placed a hand on his shoulder and told him he would be taken to a youth shelter, that his days on the street were over. But Kai barely heard her. All he could think about was Ember and how empty his arms felt without her. Kai tightened the last bolt on the atmospheric regulator and wiped the sweat from his forehead. The maintenance bay of Orbital Station 7 was always too warm, especially in the sections near the main reactor. He had been working here for 3 years now, ever since he completed his engineering certification. It was honest work and it paid enough for a small apartment and regular meals. For someone who had spent his childhood on the streets, that was more than enough. He was 27 years old now, though sometimes he felt much older. The years had been kind to him in some ways and hard in others. After that terrible day when Ember was taken from him, he had spent 2 years in the youth shelter on New Terra Colony. The shelter staff were decent people, and they helped him finish his education and apply for technical training programs. Kai worked hard, driven by a need to prove that he was more than just a homeless street kid. But he never forgot Ember. In the quiet moments when he lay in bed at night or took his lunch break alone, his thoughts would drift back to those 3 months they had spent together. He wondered if she was happy, if she remembered him at all. Probably not, he told himself. She had been just a baby then. Dragons lived for hundreds of years. 15 years was nothing to them. She had likely forgotten the homeless boy who had shared his blanket with her on that cold winter night. The thought made him sad, but he accepted it. That was how life worked. People came into your life and then they left. You learned to move forward and be grateful for the time you had together. Kai had learned that lesson well. His communicator beeped, pulling him from his thoughts. It was his supervisor, a gruff but fair man named Harris. Kai, I need you to head to the diplomatic quarters. We have VIP visitors arriving in 2 hours, and the environmental controls need a final check. Make sure everything is perfect. Understood, Kai replied. He gathered his tools and made his way through the station corridors. Orbital Station 7 was a large facility, home to 5,000 people and serving as a major hub for trade and diplomacy in this sector of space. Kai knew every hallway and maintenance shaft by heart now. It was his home in a way that nowhere else had ever been. The diplomatic quarters occupied an entire section of the station's upper ring. These rooms were reserved for important visitors from various worlds and governments. Kai had worked here before, always making sure the life support systems functioned perfectly. Diplomacy was delicate work, and the last thing anyone needed was a visiting ambassador getting sick because the air mixture was wrong. As he worked, Kai overheard station personnel discussing the upcoming visit. A delegation from the Draconic Empire was arriving for trade negotiations. The ambassador herself was coming, which apparently was a very big deal. Kai felt his chest tighten at the mention of dragons, but he forced himself to focus on his work. He had no reason to think this had anything to do with Ember. The Draconic Empire was vast, containing billions of dragons across dozens of worlds. The chances that this ambassador was his Ember were impossibly small. He finished his work quickly and efficiently, checking every system twice to ensure nothing could go wrong. The guest quarters were now ready for visitors who needed higher temperatures and different atmospheric conditions than humans. Kai packed his tools and prepared to leave. His supervisor had made it clear that maintenance staff should stay out of sight during the actual ceremony. The diplomats did not want to see workers wandering around during their formal reception. That suited Kai fine. He had no interest in fancy ceremonies anyway. He returned to the maintenance level and clocked out for the day. His shift was over, and he was looking forward to a quiet evening in his quarters. Maybe he would read for a while or watch one of the entertainment programs that came through the station feeds. Simple pleasures for a simple life. But as he walked toward his apartment, alarms began to sound throughout the station. Not emergency alarms, but the ceremonial bells that announced the arrival of important visitors. Kai paused in the hallway, listening to the announcement that echoed through the comm system. Attention all station personnel. The Draconic Empire delegation has arrived. Ambassador Ember and her staff are now boarding the station. All diplomatic staff report to reception hall immediately. Kai felt his heart stop. Ember. The ambassador's name was Ember. He told himself it was just a coincidence. Ember was probably a common name among dragons. It did not mean anything. But his hands were shaking as he stood there in the empty corridor. He forced himself to keep walking. Even if it was her, even if by some impossible chance the ambassador was the same dragon he had saved 15 years ago, what difference would it make? She would not remember him. And even if she did, what would she care? She was an ambassador now, important and powerful. He was just a maintenance engineer. Their paths had diverged long ago. Kai made it to his apartment and tried to relax, but he could not stop thinking about the possibility. Finally, he accessed the station's public information network and pulled up details about the visiting delegation. There was an official image of the ambassador, and when Kai saw it, his breath caught in his throat. She was magnificent. The small hatchling he had known had grown into a dragon of stunning beauty. Her scales still shifted between deep red and bright gold, catching the light in ways that made them seem to glow. She was large now, easily twice the size of a human, with powerful wings and eyes that held unmistakable intelligence. But it was those eyes that convinced him. Even in the official photograph, he could see the same gentle wisdom that had looked up at him from inside that old blanket so many years ago. It was her. was really her. Kai sat down heavily, his mind racing. What should he do? Should he try to see her? No, that was foolish. She was in the middle of important diplomatic work. He could not just walk up to an ambassador and claim they used to be friends when she was a baby. Security would throw him out, or worse. He decided to do nothing. It was better this way. Ember had clearly done well for herself. She did not need a reminder of the difficult circumstances of her hatching. Kai would finish his work, stay out of the way, and let her complete her diplomatic mission in peace. That was the right thing to do. But Ember had other plans. Down in the reception hall, the formal ceremony was in full swing. Station officials made speeches welcoming the dragon delegation. Trade agreements were discussed in careful diplomatic language. Ember stood among her staff, wearing the formal robes of her office, playing her role perfectly. But inside she was barely paying attention to any of it. The moment she had boarded the station, she had felt something. A presence that tugged at her consciousness, familiar and precious. She had been searching for this presence for 15 years, ever since she gained enough control of her psychic abilities to try. On every world she visited, in every city and station, she had searched, hoping against hope to find the boy who had saved her life. And now, impossibly, he was here. She could feel him, somewhere on this station. The bond they had formed during those 3 months together had never faded for her. It was still there, a golden thread connecting her consciousness to his, waiting to be followed. Ember tried to focus on the ceremony, but the pull was too strong. She needed to find him. She needed to see him. Everything else could wait. In the middle of an important speech by the station commander, Ember suddenly turned and walked away from the platform. Her staff members gasped in shock. The station officials looked confused and concerned. "Ambassador, where are you going?" one of her aides called after her. "I must find someone," Ember said, her voice carrying the harmonics that dragons used when they would not be argued with. "Continue without me." She extended her psychic senses fully now, no longer trying to be subtle or polite. The station's inhabitants felt a gentle pressure against their minds as she searched, though none of them understood what it was. Ember filtered through thousands of consciousnesses, seeking the one that matched her memory. There. In the lower levels, in a small apartment. A human male, alone, his emotions a mixture of shock and disbelief and longing. His mental signature was older, more complex than it had been, but the core of it was the same. The same kindness, the same gentle strength that had chosen to share everything he had with a freezing hatchling. Ember ran. She abandoned all dignity and protocol, her claws clicking rapidly on the metal floors as she raced through the station corridors. Station personnel pressed themselves against the walls as she passed, confused and alarmed to see an ambassador moving with such urgency. Security officers started to follow her, but she paid them no attention. She found the door to his apartment and stopped, suddenly uncertain. 15 years was a long time for humans. What if he did not want to see her? What if her presence brought back painful memories? But she had come too far to turn back now. She raised one claw and knocked on the door, her heart pounding in a way it had not since she was a hatchling. Inside, Kai heard the knock and wondered who could be visiting him. He opened the door and froze. Ember stood there, massive and magnificent, her eyes locked on his face. For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Ember made a sound, a small chirp exactly like the one she used to make when she was happy to see him, and Kai knew without any doubt that she remembered everything. Kai stood frozen in his doorway, staring at the massive dragon who had been a tiny hatchling the last time he held her. Ember looked back at him with those same intelligent eyes, now larger and filled with emotions too complex to name. For several heartbeats, neither of them moved. The corridor around them seemed to fade away until there was nothing but the two of them and 15 years of separation. Then Ember lowered her head and made that soft chirping sound again, the exact noise she used to make when she curled up in his lap. The sound broke something inside Kai. Tears began streaming down his face before he could stop them. He reached out with a shaking hand and touched her snout, just as he had done so many times when she was small. "Ember," he whispered. "You remember me?" The dragon's response came not in words, but in a wave of pure emotion that washed over Kai's mind. Love, gratitude, joy, relief. All of it flooded through him with an intensity that made his knees weak. He stumbled backward, and Ember moved forward into his small apartment, her large form somehow fitting through the doorway despite her size. "I never forgot," Ember said, her voice resonating with harmonics that made the air vibrate. It was the first time Kai had heard her speak in human language, and the sound was beautiful and strange. "Not for a single day in 15 years, Kai. I searched for you everywhere." Kai wiped his eyes with the back of his hand, trying to compose himself. I thought you would have forgotten. You were so young and it has been so long. I thought you would have moved on with your life and forgotten about the street kid who found you. Ember made a sound that might have been a laugh or a sob. Forget you? Kai, you saved my life. You gave me everything you had when you had nothing. How could I ever forget that? She settled onto the floor of his apartment, curling her tail around herself in a way that reminded him achingly of the small dragon who used to sleep beside him. I just did what anyone would do, Kai said quietly, sitting down on his bed because his legs would not hold him anymore. You were cold and scared. I could not just leave you there. But that is exactly the point, Ember said, her eyes fixed on his face. Most people would have left me. Most people would have seen a strange creature and walked away, or worse, they would have tried to sell me like those men did. But you, a child who had every reason to think only of yourself, chose to give me your only protection against the cold. You chose my life over your own comfort. Kai shook his head. I was not brave or special. I was just a kid who did not want to see something suffer. Do you know what happened after they took me away? Ember asked. Her voice grew softer, more serious. They brought me to the Draconic Embassy, and from there I was returned to my home world. My family was overjoyed to have me back. I had been stolen from my nest as an egg by smugglers who wanted to sell me on the black market. My parents had thought I was dead. Kai listened, his heart aching at the thought of parents grieving for their lost child. He understood that pain too well. But I was different from other hatchlings, Ember continued. I kept trying to tell my family about you. I would chirp and gesture, and eventually, when I learned to speak properly, I told them the whole story. About the human boy who lived in the cold, who had nothing but one thin blanket, and who wrapped me in it even though it meant he would freeze. My parents did not believe me at first. They thought I had made up the story or misunderstood what happened. Why would they not believe you? Kai asked. Because it went against everything we thought we knew about humans, Ember said. Dragons are taught from hatching that humans are practical creatures who value material wealth and comfort. We are told that humans act from self-interest, that they make decisions based on what benefits them. The idea that a human child would sacrifice his only protection for a creature he did not even know, it challenged everything my parents believed. Ember shifted her position, her scales catching the light from the apartment's fixtures. But I insisted it was true. And when the embassy staff confirmed that yes, a homeless human boy had been caring for me, and yes, he had been found without a blanket in the middle of winter, my family began to listen. My mother decided to investigate further. She wanted to find you, to thank you, and to understand why you had done what you did. Did she find me? Kai asked. She found the youth shelter where they had taken you, Ember said. The staff there told her about you. About how you never caused trouble, how you worked hard at your studies, how you were always helping other children even though you had so little yourself. They told her that you asked about me every day for months, wanting to know if I was safe and happy. Kai looked down at his hands, embarrassed. He had forgotten about those questions, or maybe he had tried to forget. The shelter staff had eventually stopped answering because they could see how much the separation hurt him. My mother came back and told our entire clan your story, Ember said. And I told it again and again as I grew older. It became famous among my people. The story of the human child and the dragon hatchling. The story of selfless kindness across species. Other dragons began to question their assumptions about humanity. If one human child could show such compassion, perhaps we had been wrong about humans in general. That seems like a lot to put on one small act, Kai said quietly. But it was not small, Ember insisted, her voice growing more intense. Do you not see, Kai? You had every reason to keep that blanket. You were alone, cold, hungry, abandoned by society. You could have justified any act of selfishness. But instead you chose kindness. You chose to care for another living being even when it cost you dearly. That is not small. That is extraordinary. Kai shook his head, uncomfortable with her praise. I really just did what felt right. I did not think about it being extraordinary or making some kind of statement. I just saw you shivering and I wanted to help. Ember was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was filled with something that sounded like awe. And that is exactly why it matters so much. You did not help me for recognition or reward. You did not do it to prove a point or to gain something. You helped because it was right, because you could not stand to see suffering when you had the power to ease it. That kind of pure, instinctive kindness is rarer than you know. She moved closer to Kai, lowering her head until her eyes were level with his. I have spent 15 years telling your story. It has been translated into every dragon language. Hatchlings learn about you in their education. Artists have created paintings and songs about the boy and his blanket. You have changed how my entire species thinks about compassion and sacrifice. Kai felt overwhelmed. He had lived such a quiet life, working his maintenance job, keeping to himself. The idea that his simple act had rippled out across entire worlds seemed impossible. I do not know what to say, he admitted. You do not need to say anything, Ember said gently. I just needed you to know that your kindness mattered. It mattered to me personally because you saved my life and gave me a chance to grow up with my family. But it also mattered to countless others who heard the story and decided to be a little kinder, a little more generous, a little more willing to help those in need. I am glad it helped people, Kai said. But I am just happy you are okay. I worried about you for years. I wanted to know if you were safe and if you were happy. I am both, Ember said. Thanks to you. And I have spent every year since trying to be worthy of the kindness you showed me. I studied hard, learned diplomacy, and worked my way up to ambassador. And do you know why I chose this career? Kai shook his head. Because I wanted to be able to search for you, Ember said simply. Ambassadors travel to many worlds, meet many people. I thought that if I had enough time and enough opportunities, I would eventually find you. And I never gave up hope, Kai. Never. Because you did not give up on me when I needed you most. Fresh tears ran down Kai's face, but he was smiling now. I missed you so much, he said. Even after all these years, I thought about you. I hoped you were happy somewhere. I am happy now, Ember said, and the joy in her voice was unmistakable. Because I have found you again. The station commander was not happy. His office felt too small with a massive dragon sitting in it, but Ember had insisted on this meeting and had brought Kai with her. The commander looked between the famous ambassador and the quiet maintenance engineer with growing confusion. Let me understand this correctly, the commander said, adjusting his glasses. You abandoned an important diplomatic ceremony because you wanted to find one of my maintenance workers? Not just any maintenance worker, Ember said calmly. The person who saved my life 15 years ago. The person whose story has changed the entire Draconic Empire's view of humanity. Yes, I abandoned the ceremony. And I would do it again. The commander sighed and rubbed his temples. Ambassador, I apologize if our staff placement offended you in some way. We had no idea that Engineer Kai had any connection to you. How could you know? Ember said. Kai never told anyone. He is too humble to speak of what he did. But I am not. And now that I have found him, I intend to make sure he receives the recognition and reward he deserves. Kai shifted uncomfortably in his chair. He had been uncomfortable since Ember had insisted he come to this meeting. All he wanted was to return to his quiet life, but the dragon seemed determined to change everything. Over the next few days, Ember made her intentions clear. She had her staff draw up official documents offering Kai a position as a cultural liaison in the Draconic Empire. The salary was enormous, more money than Kai had ever imagined having. He would live in the capital city, work directly with the royal family, and have servants and a large house and everything that came with high status in dragon society. This is too much, Kai said when Ember presented the offer to him in his apartment. I cannot accept this. Why not? Ember asked, genuinely confused. You deserve it. You saved the life of a dragon from a royal family. By our laws and customs, we owe you a debt that can never be fully repaid. This is the least we can do. Kai looked at the documents with their official seals and fancy language. It all felt wrong somehow. Ember, I did not help you because I wanted a reward. I helped you because you needed help. Taking all of this would feel like I was being paid for doing the right thing. And if people need to be paid to be kind, then kindness loses its meaning. Ember stared at him for a long moment. Then she made a sound that was half laugh, half sigh. My mother said you would respond this way. She read the reports about you from the youth shelter and predicted that you would refuse any personal reward. I did not believe her. I thought surely after 15 years of working hard for very little, you would want some comfort and security. I have comfort and security, Kai said. I have a job I am good at, an apartment, enough food. I do not need servants or a big house. Those things would just make me uncomfortable. Then what do you want? Ember asked. There must be something. Please, Kai. My family, my entire people, we need to honor this debt. Let us do something for you. Kai thought about it for a while, staring out the window of his apartment at the stars beyond. Finally he turned back to Ember. If you really want to do something, do not do it for me. Do it for others like I was. The homeless children, the forgotten ones, the kids who fall through the cracks of society. Help them. Ember's eyes widened. What do you mean? When I was living on the streets, I was invisible, Kai said. People walked past me every day and never saw me. I was just part of the background, not worth noticing. There are thousands of children like that across the colonies, across every human world. If you want to honor what happened between us, help them. Create programs that give them chances, that teach them skills, that show them someone cares. Ember was quiet for a moment, and Kai could see her thinking. A cultural exchange program, she said slowly. Focused on compassion across species. We could use your story as the foundation, but make it about more than just us. Make it about building connections and helping those in need. Yes, Kai said, feeling excited for the first time since this conversation started. Exactly that. Over the next 2 weeks, Ember worked with her staff and with Kai to develop the idea. They created a program that would bring together young humans and young dragons to learn about kindness, cooperation, and seeing beyond their own needs. The program would specifically target children from difficult backgrounds, giving them opportunities they would never have otherwise. Kai would be the program coordinator, but not in some distant office in the dragon capital. He would work here, on this station and on other stations and colonies where the need was greatest. He would use his own experience of being homeless and forgotten to connect with children who felt the same way. He would show them that their circumstances did not define their worth. The Draconic Empire would fund the program fully. They would build shelters with proper heating and food. They would hire teachers and counselors. They would create apprenticeship programs so children could learn valuable skills. And at the center of it all would be the story of a homeless boy and a baby dragon, and the simple act of kindness that had changed everything. There is one more thing, Ember said during one of their planning sessions. The blanket. The one you wrapped me in. Do you still have it? Kai shook his head sadly. No. After they took you away and sent me to the shelter, I never saw it again. It probably got thrown away. Actually, Ember said, and her voice was gentle, my mother had it preserved. When she visited the shelter to learn about you, she asked if anything of yours had been saved. The shelter staff had kept the blanket because it was the only possession you had talked about. You asked for it back many times, they said. My mother took it, had it carefully cleaned and restored, and brought it home. Kai felt his throat tighten. He had loved that blanket, not because it was particularly nice, but because it had been his only protection and then the last thing connecting him to Ember. What did she do with it? It is in the Royal Museum on our home world, Ember said. In a special display about cross-species friendship. Millions of dragons have seen it. And now, if you agree, we would like to create a replica for a museum here in human space. A symbol of what our two peoples can build together when we choose compassion over fear. I think that would be wonderful, Kai said softly. The program was officially announced 1 month later at a ceremony that Kai tried very hard to avoid attending, but Ember insisted. The station's main hall was filled with dignitaries from both human and dragon governments. News services from across the sector recorded everything. Kai stood beside Ember, feeling very small and very uncomfortable in the formal clothes they had made him wear. Ember gave a speech about the power of kindness and the responsibility of those with resources to help those without. She told the story of how Kai had saved her, speaking clearly so everyone could understand. Then she presented the program details and the funding commitment from the Draconic Empire. When it was Kai's turn to speak, he kept it brief. I am not a hero, he said into the microphone, his voice shaking slightly. I am just someone who tried to help when I could. And that is what this program is about. Teaching everyone, human and dragon alike, that we all have the power to help. We all have something we can share even if it seems small. Sometimes especially when it seems small. The applause was loud and long, but Kai barely heard it. He was thinking about all the children out there right now, cold and alone and invisible just like he had been. Soon they would have help. They would have hope. And it was all because 15 years ago, he had made a simple choice to share what little he had. After the ceremony, Ember walked with Kai back to the diplomatic quarters where she was staying. Are you sure you will not reconsider the other offer? She asked. You could have such an easy life. This is not about easy, Kai said. This is about meaning. This work will mean something. It will matter to people who need it to matter. That is worth more than any amount of money or comfort. Ember looked at him with those ancient, intelligent eyes. You know, she said, this is exactly why that blanket meant so much. Not because it was valuable, but because giving it away cost you something real. And you did it anyway. You have not changed at all, Kai. You are still that same boy who thinks of others first. I just want to help, Kai said simply. I know, Ember replied. And that is why I will spend the rest of my very long life making sure you can. 5 years had passed since the cultural exchange program began, and the results had exceeded everyone's expectations. Kai stood in the common room of the new Terra Colony Youth Center, watching a group of human children and young dragons work together on a project. They were building a miniature habitat dome, combining human engineering with dragon fire-shaping techniques. The children laughed and talked like they had known each other forever, even though most had met only weeks ago. "Careful with that support beam," a teenage girl named Sarah called out to her dragon partner. "If it gets too hot, the metal will warp." The young dragon, barely larger than a dog, adjusted the temperature of his flame with careful precision. "How is this?" he asked, his voice still high and uncertain. "Perfect," Sarah said, giving him an encouraging smile. Kai felt a warmth in his chest that had nothing to do with the dragon fire. This was what the program was meant to create. Not just education or job training, though those were important, but genuine friendship and understanding between species that had once viewed each other with suspicion and distance. The youth center was one of 12 that had opened across human colonies in the past 5 years. Each center provided safe housing, hot meals, education, and most importantly, connection. Children who had been living on the streets now had beds and hope. Dragons who had never met humans before now understood that they were not so different after all. Kai's communicator chimed. It was a message from Ember, who was currently on the other side of the galaxy attending a diplomatic summit. Despite her increasingly demanding schedule, she messaged him almost every day. Sometimes about program business, but often just to talk, to maintain the connection that had started so long ago. "How are the new recruits adjusting?" her message read. "Better than expected," Kai typed back. "The dragons are natural mentors. They have a patience that really helps the kids who have trust issues." "Of course they do," Ember replied. "They learned from the best teacher." Kai smiled and shook his head. Even after 5 years of working together, Ember still gave him too much credit. But he had learned to accept her praise with grace, understanding that arguing about it would only make her more insistent. The program had grown far beyond what either of them had initially imagined. What started as a simple idea to help homeless children had expanded into a galaxy-wide initiative. Dragon families volunteered to host human students. Human communities welcomed young dragons who wanted to learn about different cultures. Trade schools offered joint programs where both species could learn side by side. And at the center of it all was the story. The story of the homeless boy and the baby dragon. It had been adapted into children's books, educational materials, even a popular animated series. Every child in both human and dragon space knew about Kai and Ember. They knew about the blanket and the cold winter night and the choice to share when sharing seemed impossible. Kai had worried at first that the constant attention would feel overwhelming, but he found that he did not mind. If his story could inspire even one person to be kinder, to think of others before themselves, then the discomfort was worth it. Besides, most people who heard the story did not connect it to the quiet man who ran the youth centers. Kai preferred it that way. In the years since the program started, Kai had finally found something he had not had since his parents died. A real home. Not just an apartment, but a place that felt like it belonged to him and he belonged to it. The youth center staff had become like family. The children called him by his first name and came to him with their problems and their victories. The young dragons treated him with a respect that sometimes embarrassed him but always touched his heart. Ember had achieved her own success during these years. She had been promoted to High Ambassador, the highest diplomatic position in the Draconic Empire. She represented her people in negotiations with dozens of other species and governments. She had helped broker peace agreements and trade deals that benefited billions of beings. And in every interview, every speech, every public appearance, she credited Kai with teaching her the principles that guided her work. "Compassion is not weakness," she had said in a famous address to the Galactic Council. "It is strength. The ability to see another's suffering and choose to ease it, even at cost to yourself, that is true power. A human child taught me this when I was too young to understand words. He showed me through his actions that kindness is the foundation of all meaningful connection." The speech had been broadcast across known space. Kai had watched it from his small office in the youth center, feeling proud and embarrassed in equal measure. Ember had become everything she was meant to be, and he was honored to have played even a small part in her journey. Tonight was special. It was the 5-year anniversary of the program, and there would be a celebration at the center. Former participants were coming back to share their success stories. Dragon families who had hosted human students were visiting. Even some government officials were attending to show their support. But before the celebration started, Kai had one task to complete. The center needed supplies from the market district, and he had volunteered to pick them up. The winter air was cold as he stepped outside, reminding him of that night 15 years ago when he had found Ember. New Terra Colony's winters had not gotten any warmer. As Kai walked through the market, he noticed a small figure huddled in an alley between two shops. It was a boy, maybe 9 or 10 years old, wearing clothes too thin for the weather. The child's face was dirty and his eyes held the wary look that Kai recognized immediately. It was the look of someone who had learned not to trust, someone who had been disappointed too many times. Kai stopped walking. For a moment he was 12 years old again, cold and alone and wondering if anyone in the entire galaxy cared whether he lived or died. The memory was so vivid it hurt. He approached the boy slowly, carefully, the way you would approach a scared animal. "Hey there," he said gently. "Are you okay?" The boy looked up at him with suspicion. "I'm fine. Go away." "It is pretty cold tonight," Kai said, not moving closer. "Do you have somewhere warm to sleep?" "I said I am fine," the boy repeated, but his voice shook, whether from cold or emotion Kai could not tell. Kai looked down at the warm coat he was wearing. It was a nice coat given to him by the program staff last year. It kept him comfortable even on the coldest nights. He did not really need it. The walk back to the center was short and he would be inside soon enough. He took off the coat and held it out to the boy. "Here, take this." The boy stared at the coat like it might be a trick. "Why?" "Because you need it more than I do," Kai said simply. "And because someone once taught me that kindness is never wasted." The boy hesitated for another moment, then reached out and took the coat. It was too big for him, swallowing his small frame, but it was warm. Kai could see the exact moment when the heat reached the child, the way his whole body seemed to relax slightly. "There is a youth center 3 blocks from here," Kai said, pulling out one of the program cards he always carried. "If you want a hot meal and a safe place to sleep, go to this address. Tell them Kai sent you. They will take care of you." The boy looked at the card, then at Kai, then back at the card. "Why are you helping me?" "Because everyone deserves help," Kai said. "And because you deserve better than sleeping in alleys." He walked away before the boy could respond, wrapping his arms around himself against the cold. He would be fine. It was a short walk and he had been colder before. Much colder. From a rooftop across the street, Ember watched the exchange. She had arrived early for the celebration and had been searching for Kai when she spotted him in the market. She had seen everything. The way he noticed the child that everyone else walked past. The way he approached with gentleness and respect. The way he gave his coat without hesitation, just as he had given his blanket 15 years ago. Nothing had changed. After everything he had accomplished, after all the recognition and praise, Kai was still the same person at his core. He still saw those who were invisible to others. He still chose to help even when it cost him something. He still believed in kindness as a way of life, not just a nice idea. Ember felt tears forming in her eyes. This was why the program worked. Not because of fancy buildings or generous funding or even the inspiring story. It worked because Kai lived what he taught. He did not just tell children to be kind. He showed them every single day that kindness was a choice worth making. She watched Kai disappear around a corner, heading back to the center. Then she looked back at the boy in the alley, now wrapped in a coat that was too big for him, staring at the card in his hand. In a few minutes she knew that boy would make a decision. He would either throw the card away and stay where he was, or he would trust enough to seek help. Ember hoped he would choose to trust. She hoped he would go to the center and find warmth and food and people who cared. She hoped that someday, maybe years from now, he would pass that kindness on to someone else who needed it. That was the true legacy they had built together. Not the buildings or the programs or the famous story. But a simple truth, passed from person to person, from heart to heart. The truth that kindness matters. That small acts of compassion create ripples that spread farther than anyone can imagine. That choosing to help, even when it costs you something, even when no one is watching, that is what makes the galaxy a better place. Ember spread her wings and flew toward the youth center, ready to celebrate 5 years of success. But more importantly, ready to support Kai in the next 5 years and the 5 after that and all the years to come. Because the work was never finished. There would always be more children who needed help, more connections to build, more kindness to spread. And as long as Kai was willing to give his coat to a stranger on a cold night, Ember knew that the cycle of compassion would continue. Not because it was easy or profitable or even appreciated, but because it was right. And in the end, that was the only reason that mattered.